Morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here with the conclusion to the round table discussion and then a warble
Our
ring.
focus now is the direction for the medium term in this country. And we're not in a moment when there's going to be a lot of Keynesian spending, so my temptation would be just to forget about it.
Yeah, we're talking about inequality here on Sunday Extra on RN with me, Tom Switzer, and my guest, Greg Jericho from The Guardian. John Carroll is Professor Emeritus in Sociology at La Trobe University, with a new book on the subject. Greg, I was struck. Let's talk about the politics of all this, because this is really something that Shorten has raised to great effect in recent weeks. David Crowe from The Australian, he wrote recently, quote, Bill Shorten is tapping into a powerful force that positions him as a champion for younger Australians. Crowe says his message about generational inequality is hitting home. Is that right? Is inequality an increasingly a generational political issue, Greg?
I think it is, absolutely, and I think a major factor is, well, there are a number of major factors. I think first is the housing affordability, the fact that people in their 20s are looking ahead and wondering if they are actually ever going to be able to afford to buy a home in a way that my generation, I'm in my mid-40s, didn't really think about, that it was never going to occur. The other issue is the changing nature of the labour market, a greater emphasis towards part-time employment, not so much a casualisation, although there are signs of it amongst younger workers that there has been an increase in casualisation, but a real sense of also just now, and this was something that Philip Lowe, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, pointed out this week, is that people are actually starting to get used to the fact that they're going to have low wage rises. And given that we've had 3 to 4 years with flat real wage growth, that's something that is kind of depressing. Well, not kind of, is actually very depressing to think that if you're a young worker and you're looking ahead, hoping to buy a house, and you're realising wages are flat, that I think feeds in very much into what Bill Shorten's
Well, what about the
about.
economic prescriptions that Shorten and people like Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders propose? I mean, we have clearly seen with slower growth in these countries the rise of nativism, protectionism. Flat incomes, you could argue, Greg, lead to more social tension, more polarisation. And this is the point that the Wall Street Journal editorial page, admittedly a conservative free market journal, but they say the fight to divide a smaller pie would get uglier in countries that were once accustomed to rising possibility. So, in other words, are the economic prescriptions of high levels of government going to make a bad situation worse?
Well, I don't think there's any link between, well, I wouldn't argue that there's a link between high government spending and low growth. I wouldn't be arguing for more protectionism. I don't think that.
Look at the Obama recovery. That was a pretty sluggish recovery after big spending policies.
But I mean, the counterfactual is if we didn't have it, would have been worse. I mean, this
look, I just had John Key on the program. He said that smaller government and austerity actually helped grow his economy out of recession.
Well, that's because that was his policy. I don't think he's going to say it didn't work.
Well, look at the record. New Zealand.
If you look at the Australian economy, we had massive stimulus and we got through it with, better than any other nation. I think this is a debate that is nice and economic. I think the more interesting one in terms of actually what's going to happen is if we go down a more protectionist line of what I would argue would be a very foolish one of bringing, increasing tariffs and such things. That I think free trade is certainly the way to go. I think that does improve growth, but it means it is beholden on governments to ensure that the distribution of wealth and income through that increased growth from trade is taken care of, that they're more aware of that.
And we should stress that Corbyn and Sanders oppose a lot of these free trade policies. John, following on from Greg's point, though, you argue that jobs growth in this country has been overwhelmingly in skilled areas, but it's also true, isn't it, that the debts students incur in achieving the qualifications for skilled jobs, they're pretty substantial, aren't they? Especially compared with their parents. So isn't that a huge generational change?
Yes, but we've got a very smart scheme for paying that off. I mean, it's only when you get to $52,000 a year income that you pay off something like 2% on that. I mean, the UK is copying our system for good reason. I don't think that's punitive. But I do agree that look, the first principle here, I don't think it's inequality, but a society that doesn't look after its new generations, and we have not, those in their 20s and even their 30s, in terms of being able to buy a house. A society that doesn't look after its younger generations is committing a kind of crime. And I think we are in that position. So I'm very sanguine about the macro view of inequality, but I'm not at all sanguine about the huge problem that we've got on this front, led by housing inequality. But I think inequality is the housing affordability. I think inequality is the wrong word to be using in that context.
We're out of time, but thank you both. Greg, John, great to be on the program.
All right, Tom, great to be here.
Yes, inequality. The way my generation, my parents' generation, and my grandparents' generation have ripped off the youth of the world. And because we are the product of our formative environment, you could say that it wasn't really their fault. They were set in a groove by their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. And along the line, the story is that they didn't question anything. But I don't know about that. I mean, I can recall my father explaining that when he was a kid going to school during the First World War, he was taught in primary school that if you cut down a tree, you had to plant 2 trees, because that's just the way it was. Not every tree you planted survived, so you had to plant 2 trees for every one you cut down. So 100 years ago, the people who were teaching the children knew the way of the world. They knew how things worked in the environment. But it seems that anybody who's trying to pay their mortgage off by operating a farm is more or less permanently in a situation where they can't afford to be nice to the land right now. What they have to do is clear the mortgage. And after they clear the mortgage, then they'll have enough fat in the budget that they'll be able to give one paddock a rest for a year, have a fallow paddock. Which once upon a time, it was 1 year out of 3 was fallow, and then 1 year in 5 was fallow, because that was more productive. To be productive, to squeeze more milk and honey from the ducts of the landscape. That's a big thing in European economics. A Norman is the part of the sundial which knows what time it is. The economists are supposed to know how to manage or man-age the landscape to force it to become more productive. Curious, isn't it? The way we put these things in full view with crypto semantics. Just hide the details in the language. So, yeah, the economists have been in charge, and they don't like the idea of any paddock having any time being fallow. What they're into is maximising the productivity of the landscape. And they make no secret of it. You know, they'll tell you all about it. They say it on advertisements. They make speeches about it, about their constant drive to increase productivity so that there can be more food produced off the same amount of land and more fibre produced off the same amount of land, because they reckon that the population is bound to increase over the next 50 years because it has increased over the previous 50 years. They don't seem to take account of the fact that 20 years ago you could buy a Stihl chainsaw where all the components were manufactured in Germany, Austria perhaps, but the Stihl chainsaw was assembled in Brazil, because it doesn't matter how many chainsaw factories you've got. If you've cut down all your forest, your chainsaw factory becomes effectively worthless unless you can export its entire output to somewhere where the forest still exists. So I bought a Brazilian assembled German still. It's a curious idea, but that's what happened. We're looking at a little bit of political shit fight here in Australia over the Murray-Darling irrigation scheme, the basin's water management plan, which a lot of people put a lot of time into. I've actually got a hard copy of it, which I've shown on various YouTube movies over the past. I got sent a hard copy of it because I made a submission I wrote to my Member of Parliament. Back in the days when Tony Windsor was my federal Member of Parliament, he was very big on the Murray-Darling Basin Commission. And it turns out that the New South Wales Government water resources bureaucrats have been feeding information to the irrigation farmers on the upper Darling River and in the Barwon River Basin to teach them, to coach them in how to suck more water out of the river than, to all intents and purposes, they were entitled to suck. And we're talking a figure of about, they're mentioning in the city papers, 1.5 billion litres, for which the taxpayers of Australia at a federal level have paid $13 million to secure that water for environmental flows to keep the environment alive. And these fat cat trendy money grubbing arsehole scumbag irrigation farmers who believe that if they watch a litre of water go past their downstream fence, then that is wasted water and they have sinned for failing to suck that water out of the river and spread it over a cash crop for their own personal profit. What they've been doing is they've sucked 1.5 billion litres, 1,500 megalitres, because that's how water's actually bought, sold and traded out there in the basin, in megalitres. They don't trade water by the litre, it's by the million litres or by the billion litres, which is a gigalitre. So you can't talk 1.5 gigalitres to the people in the city, so therefore the media talks 1.5 billion litres because the average city zen, Denny Zen of the city, they understand what a litre is. And guess who the Federal Minister for Water is? It's Federal Minister for Agriculture, the Deputy Prime Muppet, the leader of the National Party, Barnraby Joyce, who, in the famous words of Johnny Depp, was inbred with a tomato, my local Member of Parliament. And he's tried to blame the revelation of this 1.5 gigalitre theft of water on the Australian Broadcasting Commission, who just want to take more of your water away from proper, upstanding, noble irrigation farmers and give their honourable water to the scumbag evil greenies. That's what Barney Baby Joyce let himself be filmed saying in a pub a couple of 100 miles out to the west of here. He really is a spectacular piece of shit as a human being. And what ruined him was that De La Salle College Armidale closed down to boarders when he was too bloody young to have ever gone there. He grew up in a good little Catholic working class family in a dairy region called Danglemar. I know that because I went to school with a couple of his brothers at De La Salle College Armidale. The Joyce family was so successful in breeding up to control the Danglemar locality that one of the cat calls in the middle of the night after lights out was, Murrundi plays Danglemar, Murrundi kicks off, and Joyce catches at the ball, and he passes to Joyce, passes to Joyce, passes to Joyce, passes to Joyce, Joyce passes to Joyce, Joyce passes to Joyce, Joyce passes to Joyce, and Joyce goes over and scores a try for Danglemar. Where Barnraby Joyce, the inbred with a tomato, Minister for Agriculture and stealing water from the environment, comes from. He really is an inbred Joyce. Famously inbred, like we used to joke about it, to tease his brothers, at the working class Catholic boarding school that he never went to. He got sent to St Ignatius at Riverview, where he learnt to suck up to the likes of Tony Abbott. Such is life. Barnaby Joyce, the inbred tomato from Danglemar, a dairy farming area. Warbles on at the YouTube. Time's expired. Ciao.